Hi people, I'm Marino Ravenberg here again. As you can tell from the header. Um, this video is going to be on astrology and romance slash sex. So I'm going to be discussing someone's natal chart or natal constellation, so the constellation they were born under, and how you can have a look at what someone's romantic or sex life will look like, or better said, what will be given away. By default, the astrological house that deals with romance is the fifth house, of course, and the one that deals with sex is the eighth house. The zodiac sign Leo rules the fifth house, and Scorpio rules the eighth house. So the sun, generally speaking, traditionally rules romance, and Mars rules sex, essentially. Now, obviously, just like everything else, it's definitely not a black and white matter because there are more than a few twists and turns that this whole thing can take. Venus, for example, also deals with love, but it deals with love in a different way, and I'll explain that in a second. Okay, Venus simply deals with, since Venus rules Libra, the zodiac sign Libra, so Venus by default deals with association with people, so forming bonds, forming relationships, and this doesn't just apply to romantic relationships or even sexual relationships. No, no, no. It applies across the board. Friendships, you name it. Even being acquaintances with someone. Essentially, bonding with someone in any given way, shape, or form is a relationship. And Venus, it falls under Venus's dominion. Now, as always, I'm gonna put myself up as an example. Um, if you take a look at my natal constellation, my natal chart, etc., the placements I was born under, etc., you know the deal, blah, blah, blah. In the fifth house, you're only seeing Chiron, the minor celestial body Chiron. Chiron is in the zodiac sign Gemini, specifically 14 degrees, and it's going retrograde. So, yeah, Chiron is neutral in Gemini, but the fact that it's going retrograde is afflicted, and it's also opposed Uranus. Um, Yeah, what that means in this specific case, Chiron is simply the celestial body that deals with essentially advice giving in an ironic way. So being kind of a mini teacher, Chiron essentially deals with being great at giving advice to people, good to great at giving advice to people in a specific part of life, all the while not being able to follow your own advice. That's the influence, hypothetically speaking, that Chiron wields. Bear in mind, I'm only saying hypothetically because obviously Chiron, as well as all the other by default in terms of astrology, they simply indicate what higher up has decided in terms of your character traits, but definitely not that they have any influence or say in the matter. The same way that the dials on a clock tell you what time it is, but the dials aren't responsible for the time. Uh, yeah, in any case, so yeah, Chiron here, my Chiron being there in the fifth house, afflicted and everything, simply indicate that generally speaking, I'm great at giving romantic advice, all the while not being able to all the while not being too good at following my own advice, or better said, that my romantic life, without taking the fact that I'm an occultist into account, just from a neutral point of view, basically my God-given personality. My own romantic life doesn't amount to a lot or doesn't amount to much, which is true, completely true. The fact that it's opposed Uranus also indicates that there is, that there might be misfortunes left and right caused in romantic affairs, which is again the case. So essentially, my romantic partners might bring me misfortune here and there. Like I said, this is my natural God-given personality. Um, it definitely does not apply, at the very least for the most part, based on the fact that I'm an occultist and that I can undo, relatively speaking, easily undo or exacerbate or amplify my character traits, including this one. But yeah, in any case, um, this house deals with romance. That's all you need to keep in mind. If the sun was here, for example, then that would mean that I would be very fond of romantic relationships, and I would place a heavy emphasis on them. If, for example, Venus was here in the fifth house, then I would love romantic relationships. I would be an intense lover, and I would definitely equate, and this is especially the case for women. I would definitely equate love with self-worth essentially. So essentially, if I'm not in a relationship or I'm not seeing anyone, then I feel lesser essentially, or I feel like I'm not nearly as good, or I'm not worth anything, bluntly put. Especially women have displacement. That's why also if Venus is here, it's especially more prevalent in women, for women, or in the natal charts of women. And yeah, I've seen women like these across my life, over the span of my life. Most of us have, in all honesty. Okay, women that essentially keep track of all their romantic partners like it's some kind of scoreboard, etc., etc. I'm not stepping on anyone's toes here. This is a very generic observation and neutral statement that I'm making, but I've seen not just women, but for the most part, women like that. Okay, I mean, my entire life, growing up and whatnot, I've seen women that had a mentality along the lines of, hey, if I'm not seeing anyone, that I'm not worth anything, as in, oh, or for example, oh, my girlfriends have boyfriends, I need to find me a boyfriend too. Women that literally are in a relationship just for good measure, and they're not even seeing someone because they're not even seeing someone because they because they want to, because they feel like they genuinely want to be with someone. No, it's purely more of an asset essentially. It's like a status symbol. On a personal level, I definitely disapprove of that. I think it's absolute crap. But yeah, whatever. Um, if Jupiter was here, for example, in the fifth house, then the person would have a lot of romantic partners, and it just goes on and on. If Saturn is here, for example, was here, for example, in the fifth house, then Saturn would indicate that these people have difficulty with romantic partners, as in not getting along well, or not having a romantic life at all, or their partners either being cold, frigid, and generally speaking, and just basically the fundamental aspect of romance, which is love and care, not being present at all. Romantic partners are more like roommates, if you will, or similar. And last but not least, Mars. Mars being here, for example, would stand for someone that is driven by romantic relationships, as in the person is intense, the person pursues love with vigor. Um, so yeah, that's it for the fifth house. Of course, if for example any planet was here and the planet would be afflicted, for example, Mars was here, but Mars is afflicted. Mars is in Aries, for example, but Mars is going retrograde, and Mars has negative aspects. Then yeah, it stands for being aggressive in relationships. It could be verbal abuse towards your partners, or physical abuse, you name it. Okay. If Venus, for example, would be afflicted and Venus is here, Venus is, for example, in Virgo, and Venus is going retrograde, or it has a lot of negative aspects, or a substantial amount of negative aspects, yeah, that's not good. That's not good. Venus in Virgo by default stands for someone that's critical and is sarcastic. And in the fifth house, it simply would stand for someone that's sarcastic towards romantic partners. Someone that essentially belittles their romantic partner and puts them down and stuff like that. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. Okay, Venus was in Virgo when I was born, but it's in the 8th house, not the 5th. In any case, that is it regarding the 5th house. Regarding Libra and its ruler Venus, the ruler of the 7th house, there's not a lot that I can say, honestly, other than what I already stated earlier. It purely deals with associating with people. Okay, so any kind of relationship you have to someone, any bond that you form with someone, regardless of how superficial, etc., Libra deals with all of that, even if it's only on a diplomatic level or scale. Again, Libra deals with that, so yeah, Venus by default. Now, um, the last part of this video is the 8th house, okay, ruled by Mars, specifically its zodiac sign Scorpio, and therefore Mars, obviously. The 8th house, when it comes to sex, obviously there is no love here. This is purely about sex. And when I say sex, I mean sex purely in the most physical of ways, purely carnal, pure lust, plain and simple. Okay, the 5th house deals with love, so the sun, and Mars deals with lust, unsurprisingly. Um, now, um, yeah, oh, I'm simply still going to start off with things the way they are. Yeah, as you can tell here or see, Mars and Venus are in Virgo, and they're in the 8th house. I was born under those. Mars in the eighth house by default stands for the fact that I am that I'm sexually intense. When it comes to sex, I'm sexually intense, and I have a strong sex drive. All of which is true. A really strong sex drive. And the fact that Mars is in Virgo, Mars is neutral in Virgo, simply stands for the fact that I'm a perfectionist, and that also applies to sexual partners. I have really, really high standards, definitely. Not in a bad way, obviously, but again, I have high standards. I'm not just going to essentially um, jump any woman that gives me the time of day, or any woman that even remotely comes near me or winks at me and stuff like that. No, 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 no. I have high standards, and deservedly. Um, Venus in Virgo in the eighth house, Venus in Scorpio's house, stands essentially for the same thing that Mars stands for, but Mars more indicates that I have a strong sex drive. I'm purely driven by lust, and Venus simply here indicates that I essentially, let's just say, in relation to sex drive, I can, on occasion, essentially, it can manifest negatively, not too negative, but still. And the fact that Venus is in Virgo indicates how I can be highly critical of sexual partners, essentially, to the point where it becomes sarcastic, even uh, in utmost detail. So, generally speaking, yeah, that's it. Giving myself as an example, I mean, anything you could think of, okay? Let me see, other examples. Other examples, let me see. I'm briefly just checking if there are other examples I can give. Not a lot, honestly. Not a lot. Any other planet here would indicate something along those lines. But Mars is definitely the strongest one here. Um, if Jupiter would be here, for example, in Scorpio's house, it would stand for someone that potentially has a lot of sexual partners, someone that is promiscuous, or adversely is it has way too many sexual partners, and simple keywords are sexual excesses. Um, Mercury here, for example, in Scorpio's house would stand for someone that thinks a lot about sex. Not necessarily has a lot, but thinks a lot about the lustful aspects of sex. Of course, like I said, it all depends on whether these planets are afflicted or exalted, etc. They indicate more. Like I said, with Jupiter, for example, if Jupiter were to be afflicted here, then it would stand for someone that, for example, if it's a woman, it would stand for a woman that's a slut, a woman that has whorish behavior. So not in a good way. Okay, a woman that is easy, honestly. If Jupiter is exalted, then it simply stands for a woman that has a lot of sexual experience because she's been with a lot of men, a heterosexual woman. I mean, if she's homo, then obviously women, whatever. Um, if Mercury was afflicted here, it would stand for example, someone that thinks a lot about sex in excess, honestly. If Mercury is exalted, then it's purely constructive, honestly. Not too much, not too little, perfect, near perfect balance. Okay, this house, needless to say, obviously also deals with sex addicts. Someone that's a sex addict, for example, would have Mercury going retrograde here, or Jupiter going retrograde, or Jupiter or Mercury detriment. And it just goes on, honestly. Or Uranus here, even. But Uranus only up to a lesser extent. In any case, it would by default stand for unnecessary sexual excesses, honestly. To the point where it devolves into a sex addiction, which is not good, obviously. And yeah, no, that's essentially it. There is not a lot to say about this house, okay? Scorpio simply deals with lust in the story. And the planets present in someone's constellation, as in the constellation they were born under, in the eighth house, all of that gives away information in terms of someone's lustful behavior, or whether someone is lustful or not. Okay, what the person's essentially what the person's character is, or where the person stands character-wise in relation to sex and lust overall, pure carnal lust. Like I said, with me, honestly, it's the finest example, one of the finest examples you can ask for because Mars is here. I've already said what time it is based on the fact that Mars is here. Okay, Mars stands definitely out. Okay, this is the reason why I have such a strong sex drive, and I know that. Of course, not to the point where it's like bad, but so in excess, for example, like a sex addiction or anything like that. No, no, no. But it is present in a healthy amount, but it is strong. It is strong. This is the house that Mars rules over after all, and it being there alone, oh boy. Yeah, and that's essentially it. I'll hear it if there are any questions. Talk to you guys later. Bye bye.